Hey everyone, today I've got another really useful left hand pattern for you. You can use it in quite a few different circumstances, but this one is most useful for jazz. It's a scale based walking bass line. Okay, it's really easy and it's incredibly flexible. In terms of left hand patterns for jazz songs, it's probably the one that gives you the most bang for your buck in terms both of easiness and the kind of professional sound it can give you. Let's have a look at it. To start with, let me just show you how it works. Now I've got a 16 bar chord progression that I'm going to use to demonstrate it, and I'll talk about the actual chords in a second, yeah? Before I do, let me just give the whole thing a playthrough and watch what I'm doing in my left hand. Here we go. Did you spot what I was doing there? I was playing single notes in the left hand, going up and down bits of scale and the occasional chord. Yeah, and the effect I was after was very much like a jazz double bass. Now if you think of, say, a jazz quartet with piano and drums and saxophone and double bass, it's the sound of that acoustic double bass that I was after, yeah? And if you think of that kind of sound, boom, 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 every time you play this kind of bass line, you're not going to go far wrong. Now in a minute, I'll have a look at the specific techniques I was using to come up with that bass line. But first of all, let's just think about some of the context. You can practice this kind of bass line with hundreds of jazz songs, but let's assume you want to start off just using that little 16 bar chord progression I was using there. Before we go any further, let me just talk you through that in case you want to use that to practice. By the way, if you look in the description text underneath this video, you'll find a PDF where I've scored out the chords, kind of an outline form in the right hand, plus the bass line part that I just played just then. Yeah, so if you read music and you want to copy exactly what I was doing, get that PDF. Okay, so let's just go through the chords. We're 4 beats per bar, 4 beats per measure, and for the most part, we've only got 1 chord per bar. So we've got A minor 7, D minor 7, D diminished 7, E minor 7, F major 7, D minor 7, G7 with a flat 9, C major 7, 2 chords in this bar because then it goes to C7, okay, then we're on F major 13 or something like it, D minor 11 with a flat 5th, back to C major 7, and then we've got D9, D minor 9. That chord's difficult to describe, but I've called it an E with a flat 9 over G in the bass, and I was just finishing on a C6. Yeah, as I say, those chords are in the PDF, so do download that PDF if you want to have a record of them. Okay, now let's have a think in detail about how I'm coming up with that bass line. Now, as I said, the one that I'm using today, I've actually written down in advance, and you can, as I said, you can download it below in the PDF. But often with this kind of bass line, you'll be improvising or semi-improvising, kind of stringing together segments that you've practiced in advance. Now, the trick with a walking bass line is to give it a good sense of flow and to try to stick to notes that outline the chord you're playing in the right. Typically, but not always, you're going to be starting each bar, each measure on the tonic note of the chord, the note that the chord is named after. So if you look at the first 2 bars of my little bass line there, you'll see I've got A minor 7 with an A in the bass, going down to D minor 7 with a D in the bass. Okay, what you need to be careful of is the fact that the bass note you play for a chord is the note that makes the single biggest contribution to the chord's identity. So if you make a poor choice, yeah, you can get a weird or a weak sounding chord. If we'd started at A minor 7 with a G in the bass, which is a chord note, but it's nowhere near as strong as starting with that A in the bass. Okay, so you want to make sure that you're choosing a good strong note to start with, and usually, but as I say, not always, that's going to be the tonic note of the chord. So a great deal of putting together a walking bass line is finding your way between tonic note to the chord, the kind of stepping stones that you're using to get through the chord progression. Now the good news is if you start each new chord with a strong note on the bass, as I say, typically the tonic, on the first beat of the 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, you can get away with weaker and even non-chord notes on beats 2, 3 and 4. Okay, so if you look at that A minor 7, that's what I played in the bass. So in those 4 notes, 4 beats, 1, 2, 3, 4, we've got chord notes on beats 1, 2 and 4, but a non-chord note on beat 3, and that's not really a big deal. Essentially it's a passing note, if you're familiar with that terminology, on the way down. The first beat is the strongest beat of the bar, okay, and that's handy for you because if you have a strong note, typically the tonic note on that first beat, it establishes the sound of the chord in the listener's ear. And after that, unless you go for, you know, kind of really way out bass notes, that sound is established. So A minor thinks the listener, obviously not, you know, not, unless they have a lot of music theory knowledge, obviously they're not thinking that consciously, but that establishes the chord on the first beat. Yeah, and it's less of a big deal what happens on beats 2, 3 and 4. Now, how easy you find it to put together a walking bass line is going to be very closely related to your knowledge of and your skill with scales. Okay, so yet another good reason to practice your scales. And that's because, as you can see, most of what we were doing was going up and down scales, okay, and occasionally up and down chords. Here we are quite fortunate. If we look at the key of our chord progression, we're starting in A minor and finishing in C major, which is the relative major of A minor. Yeah. Now, because those two keys are relative to each other, that means that they share the same scale notes. So there's the scale of A natural minor. You might know about other minor scales like melodic and harmonic. Don't worry about those. There's A natural minor, and there's C major, and as you can see, they're exactly the same notes. It's just the white notes of the piano keyboard, but if we were to play them as scales, we just start in different places. Okay, so that tells us right away that we are mostly going to be using in the left hand notes from that scale, those scales. Okay, if we had a progression in the key of E flat major, we would know we were going to be mostly using notes from the scale of E flat major. We're not necessarily going to be using notes exclusively from that scale. We might go out of the scale, we might use different notes, and in fact we do. I did do when I was playing through, and in the progression we've got written down that happens, but mostly it's going to be notes from those scales. Let me just play through exactly what I played, exactly what's written down in the PDF, and talk about how that walking bass line is constructed. Okay, so we start on A minor 7, and we're starting on the tonic note in the bass, and it goes down the scale to bar 2, which is D minor 7, which is right down there. Okay, I should say the other thing, the other benefit of practicing your scales is that you will find the fingering very easy here. You don't need to use precisely disciplined scale fingering, but very naturally you will find yourself doing thumbs under like that. Okay, so that's got me to the end of my D minor 7. Okay, second bar. My next chord is D diminished 7. Now here I have a choice. I could go up to the tonic note of the chord. Okay, instead what I did was go for the 5th note of the chord, A flat, because really conveniently that's right below me, so I'm creating a natural flowing bass line. Let's just hear that from the start of the progression. A minor 7, D minor 7, D diminished 7, starting on its 5th note, the A flat, and finishing on its tonic. Okay, notice I missed out the E there. I could have finished on the E, but it just gives it a slightly stronger sound. I'm outlining the chord a bit more naturally. Now my next chord, the 4th chord in the progression, is E minor 7. Here I have a choice. Ideally, I could do with getting back up the keyboard, because if I keep going down, I'm gonna run out of notes. Okay, I've got another octave, but it gets really muddy down there. So I want to come back up again. I could just jump, but what I actually did was come up, outlining the notes of a chord of the E minor 7 chord. Yeah, and that puts me in a pretty reasonable position to get to the next chord, which is F major 7. Start coming down again. D minor 7. Now my next chord is a little bit of a weird one, bar 7. We've got G7 with a flat 9. So I'll start with the tonic note in the bass, which is handy because I haven't got it in the right hand. Then come up to the flat 9, okay, which is in the chord. Okay, bum, 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 and that leads us really naturally to the next chord, which is C major 7. Okay, that B is always going to lead in a key of A minor or C, is always going to lead really naturally up to C major 7. It's the so-called leading tone. C7. Yeah, notice I've put myself in a good position for the next chord, which is F major 13. So much of putting together a walking bass line, it's kind of, I've used this analogy before, but it's a pretty good one. It's a bit like playing snooker or pool, okay? When you kind of play a shot, as it were, you know, when you pick a particular shape or particular scale to go up or down, you're not just thinking about that shot, you're thinking about the next one as well. So you're hitting the cue ball, you're potting a red, and you're lining up your cue ball to go on the black. Getting a little bit kind of tortured in the analogy there, but that's what you should be doing when you're playing a walking bass line. Not just thinking about the chord you're playing right now, but thinking about what's coming next. So here we have F major 13, D minor 11 flat 5th. Now look what I do in the bass here. I've gone for the B flat, yeah? Now, D minor 11 flat 5th has an A flat in it, okay, so that's fine. But I could have done this, okay, and it still would have sounded fine, played the B natural. But instead, I've put that in. Why have I done that? I think it just sounds better. And I've kind of borrowed it from the, I've jumped into the C Aeolian mode, the natural C minor scale there, okay? I didn't do a lot of theoretical thinking in coming up with that. I just thought, you know, that sounds better, I'll do that. And that leads me really nicely to C major 7, and it puts a G in the bass of C major 7. Now, we've talked about this before. Having the 5th in the bass of a chord often gives it a really kind of an unbalanced, on edge, a dynamic kind of sound. And then down to the C and back up the chord to D sharp 9. I've put the F sharp in the D sharp 9, D9. I've put the F sharp in the bass there. Back down to D minor 9, coming up chromatically there, as we would say, white note to black note, to put me really nicely on the 5th note of the scale of C, okay, the root of what would normally be the dominant chord, but with an E flat 9, an E with a E chord with a flat 9 in the right hand, with a G, which resolves as nice jazzy resolve to the C, okay. That was all kind of really sort of nuts and bolts and heavy detail. I was going into that in kind of quite a granular way, but that was the thinking there. And do notice that each time the thinking is all about not just playing a sound that sounds cool in the left, but lining yourself up for the next chord, as it were, and maybe even the chord after that. You could be forgiven for thinking, oh my word, you know, that's an awful lot to think about, but actually, once you get the hang of walking bass lines like that in the left, they kind of tend to sort themselves out, and they're most likely to sort themselves out if you know your scales and your chords really, really well. And if you do, they start to come really, really naturally to you. So that's about it for another tutorial. As usual, if you have any questions, just stick them in the comment thread underneath this video and I will do my best to answer them. If they're really good questions, then I might use them as part of my Piano Questions Answered series, which a lot of people seem to be really enjoying at the moment. As usual, subscribe to my channel if you haven't. Just click the red button down in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter, links are below. Check out my crowdfunding page at patreon.com/BillHilton, and above all, do check out my books, especially How to really play the piano, the stuff your teacher never taught you, which kind of explains all this stuff about chords, all the basics of chords and kind of harmony for pop piano and jazz piano, and all the kind of stuff to get you started. You do need to be able to read a little bit of left and right hand treble and bass piano music to get the most out of how to really play the piano. And if you're not at that stage yet and you kind of want to learn, then do check out my Piano for Absolute Beginners series, which a lot of people are using and finding really helpful. I will put a link to that, a link to the playlist in the description text underneath this video. Right, I'm going to stop warbling away and go and have my lunch, and I will see you again soon. Take it easy. Bye bye.